Today, we're going to explore one single, powerful saying that really shapes the entire foundation of Islamic ethics. It's known as the Hadith of Intention. All right, let's just dive right in with a pretty fundamental question, something that really applies to all of us. When you do something, what gives it its real value? Is it the action itself, the thing that everyone can see? Or is it the why behind it, the motive, the reason that's hidden away in your heart? Well, it turns out that Islamic tradition has a really powerful answer to that exact question. And it's not just some abstract philosophy either. It's a core guiding principle for how you're supposed to live. Actually, the entire framework for how our actions are judged, it all hinges on one single statement, a saying that is so important, it's literally considered a cornerstone of the faith.
And this is what's known as the Hadith of Intention.
So the saying starts with this incredibly profound line, actions are but by intentions, and every person will have only what they intended. And then it gives this really powerful example about migration, right? It makes a clear distinction between someone who moves for God and someone who moves for, say, worldly gain. The core idea, it sounds simple, but trust me, its implications are absolutely massive. Okay, so to really get just how important this saying is, you gotta look at where it comes from. It was narrated by Umar ibn al-Khattab, one of the Prophet's closest companions. And then it was collected by both Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim. Now, in Islamic scholarship, when you have a hadith that's in both of their Sahih collections, that is the absolute gold standard of authenticity. It doesn't get more reliable than that.
And get this, Imam al-Bukhari didn't just, stick it somewhere in his massive collection. He made it the very first hadith. The opening statement. It's like the thesis for his entire life's work, basically telling us that everything that follows has to be understood through this one lens, the lens of intention.
All right, so let's really break this down. What does it actually mean to be judged by the heart's true measure? The key concept here is an Arabic word, niyyah. And what it means is the resolve that's in your heart to do an act for God's sake. And that's the real key right there. It's not something you say out loud. It's a completely silent internal state. This is the scale that's used to measure your inner world. And this brings up a really crucial point. You see, scholars explain that for an action to be accepted, it's actually judged on two different scales. The Hadith of Intention, the one we're talking about, that's all about your inner sincerity. It asks the question, why did you do it? But there's a whole other side to it, tied to another famous saying, which judges the outward correctness. It asks, how did you do it? So for an action to really count, you need both, a pure motive on the inside and the correct execution on the outside. Now, what's so brilliant about this hadith is that it doesn't just leave this as an abstract idea. It gives us a perfect, concrete example to make it all make sense. It's basically a tale of two journeys. So the journey it's talking about is the hijrah, which means migration. And back then, in the original context, this was a huge deal. It meant uprooting your entire life, leaving a place where you couldn't practice your faith, and moving to a land of Islam. We're talking about a massive, life-altering decision. And this is where the power of intention just becomes crystal clear. So imagine two different people. They're both making this exact same difficult journey. Person A, their intention is purely to please God and support his messenger. So their reward is from God. But person B, they're making the same trip, but their intention is for some worldly benefit, maybe a business opportunity or to marry someone. Their reward? It's just that worldly thing. And that's only if they even get it. You see? The exact same physical action, but two completely different realities, two totally different spiritual outcomes. Let's zoom in on the exact wording for that second person. The hadith says, their migration is to what they migrated for. Now, there is something so brilliant and subtle going on in the original Arabic here. Did you notice how it doesn't repeat the specific goals like worldly gain or a woman to marry? No, it just says this kind of vague, dismissive thing. It's to what they migrated for. This is a known rhetorical device called tahpir, which means belittlement. It's a deliberate choice of words. That vague, dismissive phrasing is designed to diminish the goal, to make it seem small and insignificant compared to the incredible, divine goal of migrating for God. Okay, so you might be thinking, that's a great historical example, but what does that have to do with me today? Well, the beauty of this principle is that it scales down to every single part of our daily lives. Intention basically has two main jobs in our day-to-day. First, it can distinguish acts. It can take a regular old habit and turn it into an act of worship. Think about it. Eating just for pleasure is, well, it's just eating. But if you eat with the niyyah, the intention of gaining strength to do good deeds, suddenly that same act is a form of worship. And the second job is to distinguish between acts of worship. For example, you could be praying, but is it the obligatory prayer or a voluntary one? The outward action might look identical, but it's the intention in your heart that defines what it actually is.
You know, a really powerful analogy to wrap your head around all of this is to think of your intention like the compass on a ship. The compass itself doesn't move the ship, right? But it's what determines its course. It decides its final destination. And in doing so, it gives the entire journey its meaning and its ultimate value.
So when you boil it all down, what this foundational principle is telling us is that the why behind everything we do is what gives it its true weight. It all comes back to that compass in the heart. And that leaves us with a pretty important question to ask ourselves. If your heart is a compass, where is it pointing?